complicated, you know, man. Like a damn Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about a blue, red, man, then you get to one side and like messing up.
Good evening, everyone. Before I welcome our guests, I'd like to announce that this episode is, like the others, sponsored by Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. If you want to use the exact same workout that I use to be just as big and juicy as I am, well, you can check the description for a link as well as a code for a little bit off the price. But anyway, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. Bennett, Phylactery, how are you doing, man?
Oh, it's great to be here. That's an excellent introduction, by the way. Your video.
Yeah, thank you. I have several little intros that I cut together, and after doing a few of them, I learned that it was a skill that I could learn, but I was better served paying other people to do it because his video editing takes an ungodly amount of time.
Yeah. But I'm a Dale Gribble respecter, so excellent.
There are a few kind of through lines in our scene. Obviously, like everyone talks about, everyone's into 40K, but I think that King of the Hill is a close second, at least for the American Dissident, right?
Yes, indeed.
So anyway, just for people who aren't familiar with you, could you kind of describe, who you are and what you do?
Oh, geez, I've just humiliated myself. It was Boomhauer. I had to look it up.
I knew what you meant.
My bad, dog. So I run Exit Group, which is it's a group of guys trying to get each other squared away and to get into better employment situations, to get our preparedness dialed in, essentially to the terminal goal is grandchildren. What you think of when you think we're all going to make it. What does it mean to make it? I think it means to have your romantic life squared away and children who are going to have children, and your finances squared away. And so I think of it sort of as we're all going to make it as a service. And so we get together, we develop business ideas, we connect with, so like, you've got a concept for a business and you say, well, I'm okay at writing, so I can probably get the copy figured out, but I could use a web developer, or I could use a digital marketer, or I could use an attorney or an accountant. And it's, you've got guys in here who understand the special sort of ramifications of trying to accomplish something important in our current HR environment, our current legal environment, regulatory environment. So basically we get together, actually, I think it's at this point 12 times a week. And we do topical calls on the basis of entrepreneurship. We have a fitness call. We have a content creation call. We have a tech call, crypto. We also do project-based calls where we one of the guys is starting a shrimp farm. One of the guys is starting a literary competition. One of the guys is starting a tech boot camp. And I actually interviewed him on my last podcast. So, you rally around a project that's sort of capable of nourishing the whole, and we develop it together in kind of an incubator format. So like this boot camp, we're building that so that eventually when guys come into the group and they say, I can't be an English professor anymore, I need to learn to code, or I need to develop some technical skills, we've got this channel to immediately send him into and get him skilled up and get him employed. So yeah, that's in near terms, in the near term, it's we're getting people squared away, getting people the financial flexibility to accomplish bigger picture tasks. And the big picture task that we're all oriented around is grandkids and a society and a community that can create grandkids.
So that's fascinating, because one of the things that I'm fond of saying, and it's not an original idea, but essentially the point of being on the internet is not to win the internet, right? Like the point of
Right.
posting, the point of, making a podcast isn't to, have an exponentially ever growing audience, to get more people, essentially sucked into the system, right? It's
Sure.
to do something and build something. And so a platform or I guess a group like that, which is very focused on using the advantage of these platforms, which is the fact that like, you know, you and I would likely never have met if we were just confined to our immediate geographic area.
Right.
But because of this amazing kind of melding of the minds, you're enabled to meet, and kind of cross those barriers. So I'm curious, right? It's quite an interesting path. And how do you get here? How did you kind of like find this odd corner of the internet, and how did you start something like the Exit Group?
Yeah, so the first question, how did I get to this corner of the internet? I confess that around 2014, 2015, I was like a what's that Sam Hyde sketch, TED Talk? We looked at the data. I was definitely like that kind of bug man, sort of maybe libertarian, but kind of technocratic. And I was religious, but religious in a very kind of acceptable way. And I started to read actually Slate Star Codex, Scott Alexander, who is decidedly not our guy necessarily, but at the time he was putting out just these really honest takes. It was sort of like he was so deep in the blue bubble that he had like lost all of his immune response to crime think. Like those things were so distant from his world that he was like, well, these are fun little, curiosities to play with. And wouldn't this be interesting to explore? And I read his reactionary philosophy in a planet-sized nutshell, which he was framing as like, none of this is what I believe, but I'm just telling you what they believe. But it was absolutely bewitching and seductive. And then he wrote this anti-reactionary FIQ where he's like, okay, but that's not really what I believe, and here's why I don't actually believe it. And I just found that completely unpersuasive. And I was like, go back to the other thing. Go back to the other thing you were just talking about. So that got me started on like Moldbug and some of the, and then just sort of through following that, it was like Spandrel and basically kind of the sort of big brain, and then like Weird Right, like back in the day when it was a lot of step posting. I was a big fan of that. And so I actually, esoteric is such a cringe word now, but like those guys back in the day were really, really fun and really, really cool. And I sort of got absorbed in that. And as far as Exit, how that got started, well, basically I played around on Twitter for several years, built up. I think I had 12,000 followers when it happened, and basically a Antifa group associated with like this like UVU, Utah Valley University, like Exmo professor, doxed a bunch of sort of online right-wing Latter-day Saints. And I was not the worst. I was not the worst hit. There was several before me and several after me, and people started to like reach out, like, hey, I've got this job, or can I, I'm in this industry, can I maybe help you get squared away? And I was like, well, I'm not really looking for the kind of job that you're doing, and I couldn't necessarily fill that role. But then I saw like there were so many different roles that people were kind of throwing around, and a lot of it was like, it's because of OPSEC concerns. It was just really hard for people to coordinate and say like, here's what I have, here's what I need. And I also noticed that like I really wanted to help the other guys who got doxxed, and I wasn't able to provide anything to them even before I got, fired. So I said, what if instead of me sort of taking one route through this big tree of options, what if I just take the whole tree and let's get everybody together with all these options, and maybe they can't help me, but the odds that one of these guys can help one of the other guys is like a virtual certainty. So I said, we're going to create a group. We're going to get together at the time once a week, and we're going to deal with each other's problems. And we did hot seats where we took a guy who was afraid of getting doxxed, and we sort of talked him through his options and helped him develop. I'm big on the concept of BATNA, which is best alternative to negotiated agreement. I'm big on because in the point of exit is that exit hurts the system worse than it hurts you. And the better your alternatives are outside the system, the easier it is for you to exit, which means you don't necessarily have to exit. It means that you have leverage and you can exercise control over the system. The power of voice is always backed by the threat of exit. And so it's not necessarily in fact, it's definitely not like we're going to go run into the woods and eat roots and berries. It's more like Sherwood Forest. It's like we're going to be illegible and invisible to our enemies so that they can't hurt us, as a prelude to we're actually gonna be free within the system, because we always have this place to run to. We have these alternatives that they can't touch. They're not in control of our ability to feed our families or have health insurance or whatever.
It's an interesting analogy because it reminds me very much of Junger's The Forest Passage, where he describes kind of a similar figure. I think he uses the term the anarch, right? As this kind of bandit or rebel hiding out in the forest from the system. So you've brought up several things, and one of them is OPSEC concerns. So how do you guys as an institution essentially keep it safe, keep it so it's only for our guys?
Yeah. So the idea that you're ever gonna have a community large enough to help each other, and you're gonna be secure against infiltration, that's not the way it works. It's never gonna happen. So what we do is you maintain either pseudonymity inside the group, or you recognize that your name is associated with the group, and that's the way it is. And the way that we keep it safe is we keep it practical. So we're not talking about anything violent or illegal or untoward. We're talking about shrimp, and we're talking about JavaScript, and we're talking about how to start an LLC, and we're talking we are. And number one, any community that's about politics or about ideology, they even long before they get infiltrated, they fall apart because it becomes this court of Louis XIV where nobody's really doing anything, and so all they have to do is clique up and snipe at each other and argue and schism. And so by keeping it practical and by keeping it about accomplishment, it changes the nature of the status hierarchy. If the hierarchy in your group is built around who's got the right take, or who's got who's the smartest talker, there's always this incentive to knock down the big dog or just sort of create these coteries and factions within the group. But if you're built around accomplishing things, I mean, I can tell you who's high status in the group. It's the people that have used the group to make a lot of money and build something extraordinary. And we have those guys, and everybody, including me, looks up to them and wants to be like them. And we don't concern ourselves with now just so that the vibes are right. I interview everybody that comes in, and if I ever got somebody who was like not really on side, they're not good at pretending. Like they don't model our minds well. And so I haven't had a situation like that. I have had situations where like weirdos, just garden variety, uh, strange people have tried to sign up, and I've said like, this is probably not the thing for you. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's kept safe by keeping it practical, and then to the extent that just your name is associated, it's kind of swim at your own risk. So some of the guys are pseudonymous, and some of the guys aren't. But the rule on the inside is we keep it Joe Rogan. So if you can talk about it on Joe Rogan, you're all right.
Well, fair enough, man. I'm curious. So I'm going to ask you to pitch this as a service to a certain type of person, right? So hypothetically, if you're talking to a guy who's starting out in life, right? Like either isn't married, isn't with someone, or is just kind of starting out, you know, kind of getting his bearings, so to speak, in the world.
Yeah.
Why would Exit Group be a good place for someone like that?
Yeah, so I would ask them, I mean, I do ask them when they come in, what do you want from life? Like, are you trying to accomplish some ideological objective? Are you trying to make a pile of money? Are you trying to attract a spouse? Like, what's the goal for you? And then I say, so I guess my answer is it's very personal and particular. But the group is big enough that we've essentially got people who are where you want to be, regardless of where you want to be. We've got people who are very successful at homeschooling their kids. We've got people who have made a pile of money in digital marketing and crypto and IT and writing. So basically, like you tell me what you're trying to accomplish, and I will connect you with the person who has been there and is willing to help you and you can be yourself around. So that's essentially the pitch.
And that's really interesting because that sort of dovetails with advice I often give on this channel, right? Because I'm a younger guy. A good number of my audience is as well. And oftentimes people are like, well, how do you know how to do something? Like, how do you, go from being, like the hypothetical, neat to someone who is, worthy of respect? And really the easiest answer, and I realize it's not easy, is to basically, we'll find someone who's done it and
Mhm.
ask them about it. And I think the problem is that, what I'll be the first one to admit that I'm lucky that I kind of have a more living community than most, just
Yeah.
by virtue of many ways in luck. But if you don't have that, if you don't have a cohesive group of people connected to you through religion or where you live, then, well, you need it, and you sort of have to you sort of have to find a artificial, and I don't mean that in a negative way, just in a, it was not naturally occurring, way to meet those people. If
Right.
you catch my drift.
Yeah. So and part of what we have the accountability group calls, and a lot of that is for that kind of exploratory conversation to get in a room with lots of people who are trying to do lots of things and get different takes on get guys who are in completely different industries, get guys who are in related industries, get guys have who are maybe like 6 months ahead of you, and then get guys who are like at the finish line. And because both of those, like the guy at the finish line, a lot of times doesn't remember exactly what it was like and what it took at the bottom. But the guy who's 6 months ahead, they can tell you like nitty gritty details. Here's exactly what I've been doing for the last 6 months. And so yeah, it's both group and individual. And it's essentially a gym. Like, and I tell people that straight up on the first call, as I say, like, there are guys in here who are gym rats who are here, a couple times a week, and they're very active and they're very much about what we're doing. And there are guys who bang out a mile on the treadmill after work and go home. And there are guys who signed up for New Year's and forgot that they signed up. And I check in with everybody every 30 days. But it's very much you get what you put in. It's very much you get what you put in. And the network, and what I try to do is I try to showcase the guys who have leveraged the group the best, to show you not only here's how you succeed in the specifics of the career track or the entrepreneurial track that you're trying to succeed in, but here's how you leverage a group like this. Here's how you do the networking. And a lot of it involves just having the audacity to start a project that's bigger than yourself. Like the example I always give is I went and bought a dairy cow, and I knew nothing about cows, but it gave me the excuse to go meet the veterinarian and the butcher and the guys who run the feed store and the guys who run the auction, just all this ecosystem around owning a cow. And I sold the cow, got rid of the cow because I realized dairy farming is not for me. It's a lot more work than I have time to do right now. But I still have this great network around, and so if I want to do, I do chickens, but if I wanted to do ducks or rabbits or or fence in my pasture for some other reason or whatever, I already have this network that I built because I was doing this kind of stupid, abortive project. And so I think one of the things that people who've never been in the game miss is how much value and how much social capital you can build on even a bad idea or an idea that doesn't work out. You just the connections that you make and the things that you learn stay with you, and they go into the next thing.
That's an interesting example, right, of your kind of aborted attempt at dairy farming, because there's truly a value to failure, and obviously not necessarily catastrophic failure. If you sank your entire family fortune into dairy farming, this wouldn't be.
You want to fail well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things, and especially that people my age are not particularly good at, and there's a variety of reasons for that we don't need to get into, but it's failing. It's the idea of trying something and not necessarily being good at it. Maybe actually losing some money on it. Maybe setting yourself back, because the problem is it's it is, as uncomfortable as it is, it's a necessary part of doing anything, and especially doing anything well. And so I guess it's probably a little bit comforting that the guy who started the company, had something that didn't work out, right? Even if it was something, relatively minor.
Yeah. I mean, you start, there's dozens of things. And every successful entrepreneur that I know has at least half a dozen duds that they tried out. And even since launching, we try a lot of things that don't work. We just fail fast. We put in the amount of effort to make sure that we're testing it appropriately. But you monitor and you see what works and what doesn't, and you move on. We iterate. And in my opinion, there's a lot of guys on our side of things who are kind of creative, abstract. They're kind of bored at work because of the type of person they are. People like me. And to those guys, I always tell them to catalog their obsessions. Take stock of the things that you think about when you're not thinking about anything. And if the thing that you think about is video games, then you need to do some deeper thinking about what is it about that that's compelling to you. You're not going to make money at video games, but what is it about the particular? Is it story, or is it what are you getting? And so for me, exit, I'm into preparedness. I'm into entrepreneurship. I'm into this sort of ideological train that we're all on. I'm into family, and raising kids well and homeschooling and doing things with my hands. And basically, so Exit just encapsulates all of my obsessions, which means I never get bored of it. Like I do get bored of certain components of it, but then I sort of let those either evolve or die, and I nourish the things that I want to nourish. And so the thing becomes a better and better fit for what I'm trying to accomplish. And I'm learning every day, like, what this thing needs to be. And we spend a lot of time on it. So actually just last night we were on the weekly full group call, and we have some like protocols. So one of our guys is like a Stanford design guy, and he threw a bunch of tools at us for product development. How do you create a product that answers that is the answer to the problem that you're actually having, rather than just like, something you came up with. And we took that to the group. Like, what are we trying to accomplish? How does what we're doing either serve or not serve that purpose? And it colors how you develop the next step of what you're doing. And the way we framed it was, if your grandkids had X, and you were able to provide X for them, one thing, what would make you feel like you'd been a success? And so we had the guys come up with all kinds of ideas about like what their grandkids would need to have. And then we voted on like, well, it's this handful of things. And then we said, all right, what's in the way of making that happen? And how can we as a group affect change in that front? So like, I say that it's practical, and it is, but it's not all quotidian. It's we go deep into like, what are we trying to accomplish, and what's the spiritual core, the teleological core of what we're trying to get done here. So like next week we're reading Plutarch. We're going to be talking about Solon and Theseus and Romulus and Lycurgus, and it's going to be, what does a lawgiver look like? How does a strong man create a people where there wasn't a people before? And we're going to dig into that as a group, so that we can take it to our families and our homeschool co-op and our, like, what principle is there that you could divine that could make you a leader in your sphere?
I think the reason that I find this project so fascinating is that there's kind of an attraction to being the eternal doomer, we're like, oh, we're all screwed, and there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah, because one, it's so easy, and two, you get to sort of be right, like I saw it coming all along.
Right.
And
yeah,
there's another part of it that it's like, well, okay, like, well, and this is why I tend to get annoyed at people, at communities and people who are very much into this, right? It's part of the reason that I will continually start fights with incels, is because essentially it's like, okay, like, I don't disagree necessarily with your diagnosis, right? Like, things are not going so hot on a certain level. Like, it's true, right? Our enemies have a lot of power, and they can get you, fired from your job. They can make your life really difficult. Okay, so we've accepted that as a premise. But what is your step two? It's like, okay, things are bad, so they're gonna just be bad. I'm just gonna sit here and suffer.
And they always need you. They always need you to agree with them. Like,
exactly, right?
What is their psychological, like, if it's all screwed, then what do you care if I believe in it or don't? Like, it's because they need that to be true, because if anybody else makes it, then they just wasted their lives.
Right. Then it's not. That's on the bingo card. Jay Burden knocked something over. But it's sort of, if it isn't systemic, or at least it isn't entirely systemic, there turns out there's a distinct possibility you might just be a loser. And obviously, right, like, I've been a loser. Maybe you could argue I still am. Who am I to point fingers? But that isn't a death sentence. That's not your entire life. And
I speak with the haters and losers with great affection,
yeah.
like our president.
And there's something to it which I find appealing in the sense that we and especially more the category of the right broadly described as traditionalists, right, mourn this lack of community, this lack of a social fabric. But the problem is it's like, well, that's gone, and there's no wishing it doesn't make it come back. And so when I see something like this, that is a way to essentially turn yourself into the start of a new social fabric. And okay, it won't be the same as the old one. And maybe it's a little bit cringe because you're trying, and trying on the internet is the ultimate definition of cringe. But like, to be honest, and this is something I ask, hypothetically out of these people, like, well, what are our other options? And I guess if it's be cringe or die, then I guess I'm going to have to be cringe. I don't know. Maybe that's a stupid way to look at it, but it's how I do.
Everybody's LARPing. Washington was LARPing as a Roman. That's, they all wanted to be Cincinnatus and actually, so there's a great book. This is the one book I've read, so it's the book I cite, Albion Seed, and it talks about how the Cavalier, the Virginia planter model of child rearing, produced this incredible heroic ideal when it worked out. Like, some of the best Americans were raised according to this like planter model, and it was very much like, it was kind of, this is stupid to make the analogy, but I'm going to make it anyway. It's the closest modern analog is like Nietzschean vitalist right-wing bodybuilder, like because they were very encouraged to display thumos and rage and force of personality. They were encouraged to be forceful and violent. And then they were sort of, as they matured, they were tempered into the sort of classic image you have of the gentleman. But they were also told very explicitly to like model themselves after a classical ideal. And they would pick a hero, and they would say they were not trying to be themselves. They were trying to be Achilles, or yeah, like they were trying to embody a heroic ideal very explicitly. And like, you can see Washington in his journal like do that. And so yeah, I am 100% pro LARP. And I think the way you make a LARP not cringe is you succeed. You just and it's, I think what people think of as cringe about LARPing is that it's like a cargo cult. They think that the way that you LARP as the Romans is you wear a toga, or the way that you LARP as a knight is you say thee and thou, or like there was that genre of guy maybe 10 years ago that was like the gentle sir, like the milady he wanted to wear the 3-piece suit everywhere and a cane and stuff. And it's like, it was a LARP because it was superficial, and it was, they didn't actually understand the ideal that they were trying to embody.
Well, you see this in kind of boomer con culture, right? And I speak about that group with a certain degree of affection, right? But go to any kind of like boomer, right-wing protest, and there's some guy dressed up like Mel Gibson's Patriot, except he's a little bit overweight, and he probably listens to a lot bit, let's be honest, and then he gets back into his, his leased Ford F-350 and drives back home,
Right.
and the reason it's embarrassing is much like you've said, is because it's the cargo cult mentality. It's the spirit dancing. It's, well, what did we do when we were like this? Well, we wore powdered wigs. We had
Right.
muskets. So therefore, if I have a musket, I will be great. And to me, the phrase you used that I think is vital is that phrase, be yourself, because it sort of implies that whatever you are is inherently valuable, and maybe in kind of a like a theological cosmic sense.
Oh, at the feet of Jesus, sure.
Yeah, sure. However, in kind of an immediate social sense, I think that there's a very real possibility that you're just a fuck up, that you're just a loser, and
Yeah.
that who you quote unquote want to be, the TikTok star, the influencer that the vast majority of youth want to be now is not something one ought to be. And to me, it reminds me very much of writing, because I was lucky enough to learn to write in the classical tradition. And one of the things, and I believe that Benjamin Franklin is someone who actually, formalized this, was you learned to write by kind of paraphrasing great authors. So you would take a document, you would take, a famous passage, Hamlet's soliloquy for the sake of the example, and you would rewrite it. But you would, change a few words, you would learn the sentence structure. And by rewriting it several times, each time, adapting it into your own language, you would learn, one, what it really meant, how it was written, why it was written like that. And you would pick up elements of that person's style. Now, if you compare that to the way that, and this has gotten, even since I left school, because I still have friends who are professors or, or teachers, this has gotten worse. Where writing now is, it's personal expression to the nth degree. So it doesn't necessarily matter if it's good. It matters if it's authentic. And much like you said with comparing yourself to Cincinnatus, it's sort of just like this like awful Ouroboros of like eternally devouring yourself, like going inwards forever.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a symptom of kind of like radical self-obsession.
Yeah. More colorful way to say it is up your own ass. I mean, that's what it is. And I love the idea of learning to write by picking apart the clock and putting it back together, right? Like you would never tell a kid to like learn how machines work by just telling them to build their own machine, and the more uniquely their own it is, the better. You would have them disassemble something and keep track of the order in which they disassembled it, and you do this with software. My first experiences with programming were playing with the settings on video games, going into like the INI file on Civilization 2 and seeing how I could break the game. And it's because that's how you learn how it works. That's how you learn what things do on the inside of a machine, is you take a little piece away and then you put it back. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. And I think just in general, especially in the arts and in architecture, this is maybe like a diversion a little bit, but there's almost no respect for like being a craftsman, in the sense of being able to competently execute an existing vision, an existing style, like to be able to precisely imitate. And some of that is technological, right? Because we have all these technological tools that make reproduction seem less impressive, right? But I think in terms of like, especially in architecture, like the idea that buildings should look unique instead of looking beautiful is horrendous, and it's surrounded us with tremendous ugliness.
And I sort of, you sort of see a similar thing in the realm of the family, right? Where from a very technical standpoint, you have an almost unlimited like buffet of options, like an unlimited amount of like stacked genitalia, so to speak. But
Yeah.
what does everyone end up doing? Well, it's something that is sort of a broken parody of what we used to do. So realistically, just like in architecture, it's not like we discovered new types of buildings. They're
Right.
essentially basically squares, but we just made uglier, worse versions of them for all our innovation.
Yeah.
And
Go
sorry,
ahead.
I don't. And so there is something to be said for the fact that like this great experiment in freeing us, all the new options we've had, and essentially what we're stuck with is essentially a worse version of what came before. And I don't know, maybe that's just my inner reactionary poking through.
No, it's tradition is a computer. That's like a kind of a bugman utilitarian way of saying it, but like tradition is we ran a whole lot of iterations of this process, and this is what emerged. This is what worked. And the odds that if you're a very, very, very intuitive, very wise, very smart person, you may have one thing to say that makes that system better. Maybe, right? The odds that you can critique that system in its totality and tear it apart and from first principles, like from stellar hydrogen, synthesize a better system is essentially zero. There's just it's not that's not going to happen. And we're not only asking like the best and brightest to do that, we're asking like literal borderline retarded people to synthesize their own moral values and their own family structures from first principles, from nothing. And of course it's a catastrophe.
That reminds me very much, at the beginning you said, the purpose of Exit Group, and is to essentially like ensure, that men, in this audience, men like us, so to speak, have the ability to create the opportunities for their grandchildren that they want.
Yeah.
And to me, that reminded me very much of how Aristotle describes the ideal death. And I believe it's in Nicomachean Ethics. I can't quite remember. It's been a while, but he basically says like, well, what is the best way to die? And he says the best way to die is in your bed, surrounded by, multiple generations of your family on a great estate. Like that is what a good death looks like.
I like that.
And to me, again, right, that's not an idea that I came up with. Far from it. It's at the building blocks of our civilization.
Yeah.
And so we sort of handed people an impossible situation where it's like, all right, not only do you need to spend a certain amount of your life deciding what ought to be done, and if you're not intelligent, that might take you quite a while if you ever decide at all, but then you also have to do it, and I think that it's no wonder that the goals that we divert ourselves to as we get further and further away from that, kind of like cultural bedrock, become smaller and smaller and less worthy of our time. And I think that if you could set before yourself, like, well, what is a goal? Like, okay, hypothetically, maybe you're the next Isaac Newton, in which case, okay, a family's probably not your best bet. I would also argue if you are the next Isaac Newton, you're probably not listening to, hours upon hours of niche right-wing podcasts, right? You're probably doing something more important in your life.
Like
but
math.
That's just me. I could be right, exactly. Like being a highly autistic, math genius. But again, I
You
don't
probably
deny
know that about yourself.
Yeah, exactly. But those people exist, I'm not denying that. But it's like, okay, we're in a time of, and I feel like I don't need to defend this. We're in a time of profound civilizational collapse.
Mm-hmm.
So you as a relatively normal person, would you like to stop that? If not, I mean, to be honest, you're probably not on our side. If you are, well, what are your options? And essentially, I view, your options, and I don't mean to say this, mechanistically. It's like, well, it's either to, essentially like build a bulwark or, try and raise the next, great man. And to me, I think that, and I'm sort of unconvinced that there is some, there's some Caesar on a white horse just around the corner waiting to save us.
Yeah.
I'd love to
Mitt
be
Romney,
wrong.
but different.
Yeah. Mitt Romney, but different. Sorry, that caught me off guard. I'm unconvinced by that. I'd love to be wrong,
Sure.
but it's like, well, what would be the type of civilization to produce great men? And you sort of mentioned it when you described the planter type raising of children. That, to be honest, I think that the way you and I were raised, and not to disparage our parents, but that it wasn't the best way to raise good men. But I think that you have a much better shot of it if you're deliberate about going about that. You're deliberate about raising the kind of men that, the civilization like ours needs to thrive again. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm getting at there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The prospect of creating the right sort of person is because they say, like, because sex is easy, right? And enjoyable, and morons can do it. That gets undervalued. The prospect. It's one of these things that's very easy to do and very, very challenging to do correctly. And I have 6 children, and I'll say 2 things about that. The first thing I'll say is it's very challenging to do even with a miraculously good woman. Hard to do. But I will also say it does not occupy all of your time. When I am not accomplishing the sort of uh, deep spiritual vision that I have for myself and the things that I'm trying to do as a man in the world, um, the times when what's interfering with that is actually my children versus just my laziness and lack of imagination. It's almost never my kids, and I have a lot of kids, and basically what I want to. I think that there's a distinction to be drawn between, and I think feminists do this too. Feminists say, like, well, you want a woman to just be like a domestic servant. And my response to that is, like, most human beings in history have spent most of their lives just keeping the wheels on. And most human beings, if they are not engaged in keeping the wheels on, will entertain themselves and not accomplish something much more meaningful than that. And they have in their mind this idea that well, if I don't have kids, I'll be free to write that YA novel that's going to change the world. And and it's just not that important. It's like the odds are that the most important thing you're going to do is in your family. And if you are an extraordinary person who's just built different, you're a special boy, then you will be dynamic and energetic and powerful enough to create the opportunities that you need and raise a family. That's just what I see. The guys I know who are saying, like, "Oh no, I'm too special for that." They're not doing the thing. And I think basically we need to tease apart, like, what an aristocracy is. An aristocracy is not a randomly selected a group of people who have the leisure time, and then just by virtue of them being assigned that leisure time, they accomplish something great. No, an aristocracy is people who are of sufficient quality that when they get leisure time, they don't just, order expensive food and masturbate. Like it's not it's not a function of leisure time.
I think that is one of the many things exposed by, the COVID-19 pandemic, right?
Oh my
The
gosh,
i-
yeah.
the idea that, if we just have Andrew Yang's UBI, we'll create this rash of, hidden geniuses. And in actuality, we created a massive OnlyFans bubble, ever expanding waistlines, and to be honest, not much else. And I even count myself in that. Like, I didn't accomplish all that much during this like seemingly unlimited amount of free time. And to me, I think that there's this tendency in it, even within our own spheres, who are, I would like to think, at least more realists on this than not. There's this eternal desire to be special and to be unique.
Mhm.
And it goes back to the earlier conversation about being yourself. And I think that even within people who are probably more intelligent than most, you have to admit you're probably not that special. You're probably just a slightly above average bear.
Yeah.
And I think that there
Yeah.
is,
And you have important things to do, but they're probably not all that different from lots of other people. Like you're probably it's I sort of looking at it as like, so Moldbug has his metaphor about like elves, right? And elves being different from hobbits. And it's like there's probably some subset of the elf that is supposed to like write the elf music and design the elf architecture and make the elf plays and things. And then there's another class of elf whose job is to like learn to to play that music and to maintain and iterate and pass on that cultural inheritance. And I think a lot of us are smart enough to do that, and that's a noble and beautiful goal.
well, man, this has been a really interesting conversation. Thank you for coming on. So if people want to find, more of you and your work, where can they check you out?
Yeah, so it's exitgroup.us is the group. I also write on Substack, extradeadjcb.substack.com, and then exitgroup.substack.com is the newsletter for the group. So yeah, I gotta admit, I post when the muse descends because I try to keep it high quality, so I don't impose a hard schedule on myself. But I'm getting better at having a pretty good rhythm of stuff that I'm happy with. So yeah, that's where you'd look.
Well, and I should say, there are several, friends of the channel who are affiliated with Exit Group. I know that JD, the guy who runs Axios, is a member, and Bagby is now, newly a member. So we've got lots of friends there.
Look around, see not a lot of new faces. Yeah, that's right.
And as far as my stuff, you guys know where to find me. The show's available on Apple, Spotify. Siren got another bingo card. Jeez, this is almost a full bingo episode. Anyway, in addition to the normal places, Apple, Spotify, you can also find me on alternative platforms like Odyssey. If you want to support the show, you can either check out our sponsor or support me more directly through all the normal links. And in exchange for that, basically you get access to pre-recorded episodes early. For instance, like this one. There's a little bit of delay in production time, and I let the people who support me have access to those raw files early. It's a little bit of a added utility there. And again, man, thank you so much for coming on. This was a good conversation.
Yeah, great talking to you.
And you at home, remember, keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.